So I was really struck by your courage in writing this book, and in particular, the parts about your physical body. So I actually realised when reading the book that I'm not as confident in my physical femaleness as I might have assumed beforehand. It really drew my attention to some hang-ups that I think I've probably been sweeping under the carpet.
Yeah.
The first book that you turned to, in Love Me is a book called Pussy by Regina Thomas, which encourages you to look at your lady bits in a mirror and to touch yourself and talk to yourself in order to get more comfortable and accepting and to love your physical self.
Yeah.
Right? It was so powerful. For me, that was such a powerful thing. Because there is a visceral reaction to that reading it. Like, oh my God.
Yeah.
Not looking, I mean, I've looked at myself in a mirror, I know what it looks like, but to talk about, I mean, I've just done it.
Yeah.
And that's awkward.
Yeah.
But to talk about that publicly feels, we have such shame around it. And there's some practicality stuff here. Obviously, the fact that for women, you have to make a concerted effort, it's hidden from us unless we choose to, that's going to play a part.
Yeah.
But it's not everything.
No.
It's not all of it.
No.
Can you tell me what it was like to write so explicitly about this part of the female body that we are almost universally still a little bit ashamed of?
Yeah. I had proper, genuinely like nightmares, 3 a.m. wake-ups. Genuinely, but like through most of the writing of this, for lots of reasons, but it was the pussy chapter that actually got me the most. It was like, you cannot be writing about your genitals. It felt horrific to me that I was doing that.
Yeah.
And that my colleagues would read that, and my mother would read that, and I really was waking up at 3 a.m. with that kind of, heart pounding, you cannot do that. And then, of course, I realised the fact that there was such a visceral reaction going on to a part of our bodies was the whole point of why I wanted to do it. Well, I didn't want to, on some level I really didn't, but on another level I was like, this is terrible that as a woman I find the idea of naming or writing about the part of my body that is responsible for so much pleasure and for other women giving life and birth, the fact that we find that so horrific to talk about, look at. So you mentioned that you have looked. When I read Pussy, I had never looked at myself before. And so I know, and the book says, you should look in this mirror and you go, good morning, gorgeous. And it was so confronting, and so I kept avoiding doing it. And I kept going back to this book, but I was going, no, I can't do that. And then I was talking to my sister about it. We were walking around the park, and I was talking to her about this book, and she was going, what's the point in doing this? And so I explained the point of it. Regina Thomas believes that when we cannot even name or look at or acknowledge almost this part of our body that is so innately feminine and actually, so powerful and so important in terms of what happens there, that she said we are cutting off so much of our power. And this is absolutely the product of a patriarchal world where women, more than I had ever understood, have been raised and conditioned to ignore parts of ourselves. Our sex life is usually in service of other people, or that would have been the messages that I got. So for her, we need to look at our body parts, our genitals, our pussy, she calls it. We need to touch it, we need to understand it, become friends with it, and also name it. So she asked this really good question at the beginning of the book, which is, what were you brought up calling your genitals? And people came up with all sorts of like peaky, purse, woo woo.
Yeah.
And she makes the point that for boys it will mostly be a penis.
Yes.
It's very straightforward. For girls, there's all these little twee names. And she said that the message we get is that when we cannot even name our genitals, the subconscious message is that it's so shameful, it shouldn't exist.
Yeah.
That we cannot just name something. And then, some people will be proud, she says in these workshops that she does, that some people are proud that, well, it's my vagina. But actually our vagina isn't what we sometimes think it is, and myself included. So the vagina technically is our inside tube, and the flesh and the clitoris and all that beautiful stuff outside is the vulva,
which is a word that people don't know.
Which so I think she says it's just so important that we start to connect to this part of our body in order to connect to our power and our female power. And I would have been so eye-rolly about these concepts before. I really would. I would not have what does that even mean? And I didn't know I'd been influenced by patriarchy because, I grew up in a family with 3 sisters, or we were told we could do whatever we wanted. I was brought up in a time when Margaret Thatcher was Prime Minister, so there was a woman in leadership. I didn't really understand how much internalised misogyny I had, but there was loads, and it's wrapped up in this part of this in the body. And so yes, when my sister was saying what's the point in doing this, and I was explaining it, and then she made this joke of, well, make sure you don't get notions. And notions is an Irish phrase, so it's basically getting full of yourself,
right?
Because I was explaining that you need to fall in love with yourself, but the joke in Ireland is you should never do that.
Yeah.
The joke that's not a joke.
Yeah.
And it made me so angry. And she was not saying that in truth, but she was kind of almost like mimicking this idea that we would have about the idea of falling in love with yourself. It made me so angry that I went home, got out the mirror, and looked. But then I had it on one of those mirrors that it's got the normal side and then the magnification side. So then I got the magnification side out, and I've got to say I found it really shocking and upsetting looking at myself. It brought up so much. And I had white hairs, and it made me so sad that the first time I was looking at this part of my body, I already had white hairs. And I did have all these feelings of but this looks gross. This is not nice. And it made me so sad. And again, I didn't know that I had all those feelings going on about that part of my body. And of course, loads of, I'm aware of other things that I think badly about my body. There's always the need to be slimmer and look at you. But I think looking at my genitals in that way really seemed to just, I couldn't see the beauty in any of it. I thought it looked really ugly. And Regina Tomashauer said that this is really a normal reaction, and you need to keep doing it and keep doing it. And you go through these phases of revulsion into acceptance, into, oh, actually I can kind of see that looks amazing and beautiful, into then what she calls rapture. And I never really have made it into the rapture stage. She talks about the Alleluia chorus, and you look at yourself and you're like, oh my God, I'm a gift. I never made it to that, but I've definitely made it beyond revulsion and repulsion, and it's now a part of my body that's, God, aren't we lucky really to have so much pleasure there. So Regina Tomashauer talks about the clitoris is the only part of the human body, male, female, the only part of the human body, any human body, that's only function as pleasure.
Yeah.
And so she takes this as proof that pleasure is actually, it's so much of what drives us, it's what we should be living from, and society has really kind of told us a load of other things, no pain, no gain, and our pleasure is wrong and dirty, it's all about the other person's pleasure. And she's like, no, this is totally wrong, and our whole body wants us. It's proof of the fact that we should be living in pleasure. And I don't always live that way, but I love the message. I think she's right.
I do too. I mean, I had 2 thoughts about that. One thought, I just thought it does have a function. Because without the ability to experience that pleasure, it has a function to evolution, because it's part of the reproductive success of our species, right? Because sure, we could just have men forcing themselves upon us and we could still produce that. That is a way it could happen, but surely it's easier to get a species to reproduce if they enjoy having sex. So I do actually question, now that you say it, I didn't question this when I read the book, actually, it just occurred to me now. But here's something that's wonderful. So my boyfriend is Slovenian.
Yeah.
The Slovenian word for clitoris is Štugotavček. It's really hard to say, I'm sure I'm butchering it. Štugotavček was one of the first. It was the first word I learned in Slovenian.
Slovenian.
Yeah, all my priorities straight. And it has its root. It's very clearly linked to the Slovenian word for tickling. It comes from the word to tickle. And I was like, that's wonderful. You know, I'm sure that's not the case with the word clitoris. I looked it up, and it is. The root, it comes from, I can't remember the specifics now, but the Latin root, I think, of the word, it means to tickle or to enjoy or to laugh or something like that.
I didn't know that.
Nor did I.
Gorgeous.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Seems really important.
Yeah.